The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as Prince William walked slowly through the rose garden. His footsteps were heavy, each one carrying the weight of responsibility that had suddenly fallen upon his shoulders. The news had arrived just hours before dawn. His father, King Charles, had taken a turn for the worse in his battle with cancer. The palace staff moved quietly around him, their usual cheerful morning greetings replaced with respectful nods and concerned glances. Princess Kate found him there, standing among the blooming roses that his late grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had loved so dearly. She approached without a word, her hand gently finding his arm. William turned to look at his wife, and in that moment she saw everything he was feeling written across his face: the fear of losing another parent, the overwhelming pressure of potentially becoming king sooner than expected, and the deep love he held for his family, all mixed together in his eyes. "The children don't know yet," William said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Kate nodded, understanding immediately. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were still sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware that their world might be about to change forever. How do you explain to a child that their grandfather, the king, might not be with them much longer? How do you prepare them for a future that seems to be rushing toward them faster than anyone wanted? Kate squeezed his arm gently. "We'll face this together," she said, her voice steady and strong. "Whatever comes, we'll handle it as a family." William looked at her with such gratitude that it made her heart ache. She had always been his anchor, the steady presence that kept him grounded when the storms of royal life threatened to overwhelm him. They walked back toward the castle together, their hands intertwined. The morning staff they passed could see the change in them, the way they held themselves, the quiet determination in their steps. Word was already spreading through the palace that something significant was happening. The usual morning routines were being quietly adjusted, meetings were being rescheduled, and security was being increased. Inside the castle, Kate made her way to the children's wing, while William headed to his private office to begin the difficult phone calls that lay ahead. She stood outside George's room first, listening to the sound of his gentle breathing through the door. At 14, he was old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to feel the weight of his own future pressing down on him. Charlotte at 12 was sensitive and intuitive. She would know something was wrong the moment she saw their faces. And Louis, still just 10 years old, would need extra comfort and reassurance. Kate pushed open George's door quietly and sat on the edge of his bed. The morning light was streaming through his windows, illuminating the photos on his nightstand. Pictures of family holidays, moments with his grandfather, memories of a childhood that might be ending sooner than anyone had planned. George stirred as he felt her presence, his eyes opening slowly. "Mum," he said, his voice thick with sleep. "Is everything all right?" Even in his drowsy state, he could sense that something was different. Kate smoothed his hair back from his forehead, the same gesture she had made countless times since he was a baby. "We need to talk, darling," she said gently. "All of us together. Your father is waiting downstairs." George sat up immediately, now fully awake. He had inherited his father's intuition, and he knew that early morning family meetings usually meant something serious was happening. As they made their way to Charlotte's room, Kate thought about how much their lives had changed since she had married William 15 years ago. She had gone from being a commoner, a photographer's assistant living in London, to becoming one of the most watched women in the world. The journey had not always been easy, but moments like these reminded her why she had chosen this path. It wasn't about the titles or the palaces or the jewels. It was about being there for the people she loved when they needed her most. Charlotte was already awake when they entered her room, sitting by her window and brushing her long hair. She looked up at them with knowing eyes. She had always been perceptive, able to read the emotions of everyone around her with startling accuracy. "It's Grandpa Charles, isn't it?" she said quietly. Kate and George exchanged glances. Charlotte's directness sometimes caught them off guard, but it was also one of the things they loved most about her. She didn't like to dance around difficult subjects. She faced them head-on, just like her great-grandmother had done. "Yes, sweetheart," Kate said, sitting beside her on the window seat. "We need to go see your father and talk about some important things." Charlotte nodded and took her mother's hand. Even at 12, she understood that their family was different from others, that their personal struggles often became public knowledge, and that they had responsibilities that other children her age didn't have to think about. Louis was the last to wake up, and his reaction was the most heartbreaking of all. When Kate gently shook him awake, he smiled his bright, innocent smile and immediately wrapped his arms around her neck for a hug. He was still young enough to believe that his parents could fix anything, that the adults in his life would always be able to protect him from the scary things in the world. "Are we having breakfast together?" he asked excitedly. Family breakfasts were a special treat, usually reserved for weekends or holidays. Kate's heart clenched as she realized that after this morning, their family dynamics might never be quite the same again. "Yes, darling," she said, holding him close for just a moment longer than usual. "We're all going to have breakfast together, and Daddy has some important things to tell you." The four of them made their way down the grand staircase together, their footsteps echoing in the large hallway. William was waiting for them in the morning room, where breakfast had been laid out on the small round table they used for family meals. He had changed into casual clothes, jeans and a sweater instead of his usual formal attire. Kate knew this was intentional, his way of trying to make this conversation feel as normal and comfortable as possible for the children. As they sat down around the table, William took a deep breath. Kate reached over and placed her hand on his, giving him the strength he needed to begin. The children looked at them expectantly, sensing that whatever their father was about to tell them would change everything. "I got a call very early this morning," William began, his voice steady but soft. "It was about your grandfather, Grandpa Charles. He's been very sick, as you know, and the doctors are worried that he might not get better." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the mantelpiece. George straightened in his chair, his young face suddenly looking older than his years. Charlotte reached for Louis's hand under the table. Louis looked confused, not quite understanding what his father was trying to tell him. "Does this mean he's going to die?" Charlotte asked, her voice barely above a whisper. William's eyes filled with tears that he quickly blinked away. "We don't know for certain," he said honestly, "but we need to be prepared for that possibility. And if that happens, it means that our family will have some very big changes ahead of us." He paused, looking at each of his children in turn. "It means that I would become king sooner than we all expected, and that all of you would have new responsibilities as well." The weight of these words settled over the breakfast table like a heavy blanket. Kate watched her children process this information, each of them reacting in their own way. George's jaw tightened with determination. He was already thinking about what this would mean for his future. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back, trying to be strong for her younger brother. Louis looked from one family member to another, still not fully grasping the magnitude of what was being discussed. "But we're still a family," Kate said firmly, addressing all of them but looking especially at Louis. "No matter what titles we have or what responsibilities come our way, we're still us. We still love each other, we still take care of each other, and we still face everything together." William nodded, grateful for her words. "Your mother is absolutely right," he said. "Nothing about who we are as a family changes. We just might have some different jobs to do." He reached across the table and took George's hand. "And we'll learn how to do those jobs together, step by step." The conversation continued for another hour, with the children asking questions and William and Kate doing their best to provide honest, age-appropriate answers. They talked about what it would mean for William to be king, how their daily lives might change, and what new responsibilities each of them might have. Through it all, Kate marveled at the maturity and grace her children showed in the face of such overwhelming news. As the morning wore on, they were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. William's private secretary entered with an apologetic expression, carrying a folder of urgent documents that required immediate attention. The real world was already intruding on their family moment, reminding them all that their personal grief and fears would have to be balanced with their public duties. Kate stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the grounds where tourists were already beginning to gather for the day's tours. Soon those tourists would be looking at their family with even greater intensity, analyzing every expression, every gesture, every public appearance for clues about how they were coping with their loss and their new roles. "We should visit Grandpa Charles today," she said, turning back to her family. "All of us together." William nodded immediately, understanding that this might be one of their last opportunities to be with the king while he was still conscious and aware. The children agreed without hesitation. Even Louis, who still didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation, knew that visiting his grandfather was important. They spent the rest of the morning making arrangements for the visit, coordinating with security, medical staff, and the palace communications team to ensure that their private family time could be protected from media intrusion. As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Kate helped Charlotte choose an appropriate outfit while William spoke with George about the importance of spending quality time with their grandfather. Louis insisted on bringing a drawing he had made the previous week, a colorful picture of the whole family standing in front of Buckingham Palace, with everyone smiling and holding hands. The drive to the hospital was quiet, each family member lost in their own thoughts. Kate held William's hand tightly, feeling the tension in his body as they got closer to their destination. She knew that seeing his father in a weakened state would be difficult for him, especially with the children present. But she also knew that these moments together as a family were precious and irreplaceable. When they arrived at the private medical facility where King Charles was receiving treatment, they were escorted through a discreet entrance away from any potential media attention. The hallways were quiet and sterile, a stark contrast to the warmth and life of their family homes. Kate kept Louis close to her side, preparing him for what he might see when they entered his grandfather's room. King Charles was awake when they arrived, and despite his obvious fatigue and the medical equipment surrounding him, his face lit up when he saw his grandchildren. George approached the bed first, taking his grandfather's hand with a gentle confidence that made Kate proud. Charlotte followed, giving the king a soft kiss on his cheek and showing him the book she had brought to read to him. Louis climbed carefully onto the bed, snuggling close to his grandfather and presenting his drawing with excitement and pride. William stood at the foot of the bed, watching his children interact with their grandfather, and Kate could see the emotion overwhelming him. This was likely one of the last times they would all be together like this, and everyone in the room seemed to understand the significance of the moment. King Charles spoke quietly with each of his grandchildren, sharing memories, offering gentle advice, and expressing his love for them in ways that would stay with them forever. As the afternoon wore on, Kate noticed that William had grown increasingly quiet. She could see him struggling with the reality of what lay ahead, not just the loss of his father, but the enormous responsibility that would fall to him as the new king. She excused herself from the room for a moment and gestured for him to follow her into the hallway. "Talk to me," she said simply, taking both of his hands in hers. William looked at her with eyes full of pain and uncertainty. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I thought we would have more time. I thought he would recover, that we would have years to prepare George for what's coming, years for me to learn everything I need to know." Kate pulled him into her arms, holding him tightly as he struggled with emotions he rarely allowed himself to express. "You are ready," she whispered fiercely. "You've been preparing for this your whole life, even when you didn't realize it. And you won't be doing it alone. We're a team, remember? We always have been." They stood there in the hospital hallway, holding each other and drawing strength from their shared love and commitment. Around them, the world continued to spin, but in that moment they were just a husband and wife facing an uncertain future together, determined to support each other and their children through whatever challenges lay ahead. When they returned to King Charles's room, they found him having a quiet conversation with George about the responsibilities of leadership and the importance of serving others. Charlotte was reading to Louis from a book of fairy tales, her voice soft and soothing in the medical atmosphere. It was a scene of such tender family love that Kate felt her eyes fill with tears. As the day drew to a close and visiting hours came to an end, each family member said their individual goodbyes to King Charles. Kate was the last to approach his bedside, and he took her hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," he said quietly, his eyes conveying more gratitude than his words could express. "Thank you for loving my son, for giving me those beautiful grandchildren, and for being the heart of this family." Kate squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the emotion in her throat. The drive home was even quieter than the trip to the hospital had been. The children were exhausted from the emotional weight of the day, and William stared out the window at the countryside passing by. Kate knew that tonight would be a difficult one for all of them, filled with difficult conversations, tears, and the kind of raw honesty that families share during times of crisis. As they pulled into the gates of their home, Kate made a silent promise to herself and to her family. Whatever came next, whether it was weeks, months, or years before William became king, they would face it together with grace, compassion, and the unwavering love that had always been the foundation of their marriage and their family. 3 weeks had passed since that emotional hospital visit, and the rhythm of their daily lives had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. King Charles had returned home to rest, but everyone knew this was likely a temporary reprieve. The palace corridors buzzed with a different energy now. Staff members spoke in hushed tones, meetings were held behind closed doors more frequently, and there was an underlying current of preparation for changes that everyone hoped wouldn't come too soon. Kate stood in her private sitting room, reviewing the schedule that her personal secretary had just delivered. The next month was packed with engagements that had taken on new significance. Every public appearance now carried additional weight, as people watched her family more closely than ever before. She was scheduled to visit 3 hospitals, attend 2 charity galas, and host a reception for young entrepreneurs. Each event represented an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of leadership and compassion that would soon be expected of them on an even larger scale. William entered the room carrying 2 cups of tea, a morning ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage, despite their increasingly busy schedules. He sat beside her on the comfortable sofa they had chosen together years ago, back when they were just newlyweds, learning to navigate their new life in the public eye. "The children seem to be adjusting well," he said, referring to the conversations they had been having over the past few weeks. George had thrown himself into his studies with renewed focus, as if preparing himself for the additional responsibilities that might come his way. Charlotte had become even more protective of Louis, taking on an almost maternal role that both touched and worried her parents. Louis, meanwhile, seemed largely unaffected by the gravity of the situation, which Kate knew was both a blessing and a challenge. "George asked me yesterday when he would need to start learning about being king," Kate said, setting down her schedule to give William her full attention. "I told him that his childhood shouldn't be rushed, but I could see in his eyes that he's already thinking about it constantly." William nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. At 14, George was at an age where he was naturally beginning to think about his future, but the weight of potentially inheriting the throne much sooner than expected was adding pressure that no teenager should have to bear. They had been careful to maintain as much normalcy as possible in his life. He still attended school with his friends, played sports, and enjoyed the hobbies that any boy his age would pursue. But there was no escaping the reality that his future would be different from that of his peers. "I've been thinking about taking him on some of my engagements," William said carefully. "Nothing too formal or overwhelming, but maybe some of the charity visits, some of the community events. Let him see what this work actually involves, beyond the ceremonial aspects." Kate considered this suggestion, weighing the benefits of practical experience against the risk of thrusting their son into the spotlight too early. "Which ones did you have in mind?" she asked, reaching for the folder that contained William's upcoming schedule. Together, they went through his appointments for the following month, discussing which events might be appropriate for George to attend and which ones should remain adults only. It was a delicate balance. They wanted to prepare him gradually, but they also wanted to protect his childhood for as long as possible. Their conversation was interrupted by Charlotte's voice calling from the hallway. "Mum, Dad, can we come in?" Kate and William exchanged glances, hearing something in their daughter's tone that suggested this wasn't just a casual family visit. "Of course, sweetheart," Kate called back, and all 3 children entered the sitting room together. George was carrying what appeared to be a folder of his own. Charlotte had her arms full of books, and Louis was clutching his favorite stuffed animal, a small lion that had been with him since he was a toddler. "We've been talking," George said, settling into one of the armchairs with a seriousness that made him seem older than his years. "About Grandpa Charles, about what might happen, about what it would mean for all of us." Charlotte and Louis sat on the carpet at their parents' feet, creating an intimate family circle. "We want to help," Charlotte added, her voice steady and determined. "We know that things might change, and we want to be ready to do our part." Kate felt her heart swell with pride at her children's maturity, while simultaneously aching for the innocence they seemed to be voluntarily leaving behind. Louis looked up at his parents with wide, earnest eyes. "I want to help people too," he said simply, "like you and Daddy do." The purity of his statement, the genuine desire to serve others that was already evident in their youngest child, brought tears to Kate's eyes. William leaned forward, meeting each of his children's gaze in turn. "What kind of help did you have in mind?" he asked, taking their initiative seriously rather than dismissing it as childhood fantasy. George opened his folder and pulled out several sheets of paper covered with his neat handwriting. "I've been researching the charities that our family supports," he said. I want to understand what they do, what problems they're trying to solve, how I might be able to help when I'm older. The papers contained detailed notes about homelessness, mental health initiatives, environmental conservation, and youth development programs. Charlotte held up her stack of books. Biographies of previous queens and female members of the royal family.
I want to learn from the women who came before us, she explained. Great-Grandma Elizabeth, Grandma Diana, all the others who found ways to make a difference. I want to understand how they balanced being royal with being real people who cared about others. Even Louis had prepared something to contribute. He had drawn pictures of himself helping in various ways, serving food to people who looked hungry, reading to children in hospitals, planting flowers in parks. His artistic interpretation of service was simple but profound, capturing the essence of what their family's role was really about. Kate and William looked at each other over their children's heads, communicating in the wordless way that couples develop after years of partnership. Their children were growing up faster than they had hoped, but they were growing up with values and purposes that would serve them well in whatever future awaited them. I think these are all wonderful ideas, Kate said, her voice thick with emotion. And I think there are ways we can start exploring some of them right away, even while Grandpa Charles is still with us and things are still normal. She paused, realizing that normal was a relative term for their family. William stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where tourists were already gathering for the day's activities. Your great-grandmother used to say that being royal wasn't about the titles or the ceremonies, he said, turning back to face his family. She said it was about finding ways to serve others, to use whatever platform you have to make life better for people who might not have the same advantages you do. That's what we want to do, George said firmly. All of us, together. Over the following days, Kate began to see this conversation as a turning point for their family. The children approached their regular activities with new purpose and awareness. George paid closer attention during their dinner conversations about current events, asking thoughtful questions about political developments and social issues. Charlotte started volunteering at a local animal shelter, spending her Saturday mornings helping care for abandoned pets. Louis began saving his allowance money in a special jar labeled "For People Who Need Help." Meanwhile, Kate found herself taking on additional responsibilities as William spent more time in meetings with palace advisors, government officials, and other members of the royal family. She attended more solo engagements, representing the family at events that previously would have required both their presence. Each public appearance was now scrutinized more carefully by the media and the public, who were watching for signs of how she might handle even greater responsibilities in the future. One particularly challenging day began with a visit to a children's hospital in London. Kate had been patron of the hospital for several years, but this visit felt different somehow. The staff seemed more attentive, the media coverage was more intense, and the parents of the sick children looked at her with a mixture of hope and expectation that felt heavier than usual. She spent the morning moving from room to room, talking with young patients and their families. Each conversation required her to be fully present, to offer comfort and encouragement, while managing her own emotions about the sick children she was meeting. In one room, she sat with a 6-year-old boy who was receiving treatment for leukemia. His mother stood nearby, watching anxiously as her son showed Kate the drawings he had made of superheroes. "This one is you," the boy said, pointing to a figure in a blue dress with a crown. "You're a superhero because you come to visit sick kids and make them feel better." Kate's throat tightened as she looked at the drawing, seeing herself through the eyes of this brave little boy who was fighting for his life. "What's your superpower?" she asked him, sitting on the edge of his hospital bed. The boy thought for a moment, then smiled brightly. "I'm really good at being brave," he said. "Even when the medicine makes me feel yucky, I'm still brave." Kate nodded seriously, recognizing the profound wisdom in his simple statement. "That's the most important superpower of all," she told him. And she meant it completely. After leaving the hospital, Kate sat in the car for several minutes before instructing her driver to return to the palace. The visit had affected her more deeply than usual, and she found herself thinking about the children she had met, their families, their struggles, and their incredible resilience. She thought about her own children, healthy and safe and surrounded by every advantage in the world. And she felt both grateful and burdened by the contrast. When she arrived home, she found William in his study, surrounded by papers and looking exhausted. He glanced up when she entered,
and she could see immediately that his day had been as emotionally challenging as hers. "How was the hospital visit?" he asked, setting aside the documents he had been reviewing. Kate sat in the chair across from his desk, still processing everything she had experienced. "Humbling," she said honestly. "These families are dealing with such serious challenges, and they look at us like we have some kind of power to make things better for them." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes I wonder if we're doing enough, if we're using our positions in the most effective way possible." William leaned back in his chair, understanding exactly what she meant. "I've been having similar thoughts," he admitted, "especially lately, with everything that's happening with Father. It makes you think about legacy, about what kind of difference you want to make with the time you have." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside William's study windows, the afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the palace grounds. Staff members moved quietly through the corridors, going about their duties with the discretion and efficiency that kept their household running smoothly. "I want to expand my patronages," Kate said suddenly, the idea forming as she spoke. "I want to take on more organizations, more causes, especially ones that focus on children and families facing serious challenges." William looked at her with interest, recognizing the determination in her voice. "Which ones did you have in mind?" he asked, pulling out a notebook to record her thoughts. Kate had clearly been thinking about this for some time. She mentioned several organizations that worked with children in foster care, families affected by mental illness, and communities struggling with poverty and social isolation. Each cause she described was connected to something she had observed during her public engagements, some group of people whose needs had touched her heart and motivated her to want to do more. "I also want to be more involved in the children's education about our family's role," she continued. "Not just George, but Charlotte and Louis, too. I want them to understand that privilege comes with responsibility, that the advantages they have are meant to be used in service of others." As they discussed these ideas, Kate felt a sense of purpose and clarity that had been building over the past few weeks. The uncertainty about King Charles's health and their family's future had initially felt overwhelming, but it was also serving as a catalyst for them to think more deeply about their values and their goals. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the study door. Charlotte entered, carrying a tray with sandwiches and tea. She had clearly instructed the kitchen staff to prepare something for her parents, recognizing that they had been so busy they might have forgotten to eat lunch. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the tray on William's desk with careful precision. "And I wanted to tell you about something that happened at the animal shelter today." She settled into the chair next to Kate's, her face bright with excitement and purpose. "There was a family there," Charlotte began, "with 3 young children, and they had to give up their dog because they couldn't afford to take care of it anymore. The children were crying, and the parents looked so sad and embarrassed." Kate and William listened carefully, recognizing that their daughter was processing something important. "I started thinking about how many families might be facing the same problem," Charlotte continued. "People who love their pets but can't afford veterinary care or food or other necessities. What if there was a way to help families keep their pets instead of having to give them up?" Kate felt a surge of pride at her daughter's compassionate observation and creative thinking. "That's a wonderful insight, darling," she said. "What kind of help do you think might make a difference?" Charlotte had clearly been thinking about this throughout the day. She described ideas for mobile veterinary clinics that could provide affordable care, food banks specifically for pet supplies, and educational programs to help families learn about proper pet care. Her suggestions were thoughtful and practical, showing a level of social awareness that impressed both her parents. "Could I maybe start a small program like that?" Charlotte asked hopefully. "Nothing too big, but maybe something that could help a few families keep their pets." William and Kate exchanged glances, seeing their daughter's genuine desire to make a difference and recognizing an opportunity to encourage her developing sense of social responsibility. "I think that's a fantastic idea," William said. "Let's talk about how we might be able to make something like that work." They spent the next hour discussing Charlotte's proposal, with Kate taking notes and William offering suggestions based on his experience with charitable initiatives. As the afternoon turned into evening, Kate realized that this conversation represented something significant for their family. They were no longer just talking about preparing for potential future responsibilities. They were actively identifying ways to make a difference right now with the resources and platform they currently had available. That night, as Kate tucked Louis into bed,
He looked up at her with his characteristic combination of innocence and insight. "Mummy," he said softly, "are we going to help more people now?" The simplicity of his question caught her off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she asked, sitting on the edge of his bed and smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "George is learning about helping people, and Charlotte wants to help families keep their dogs, and you and Daddy are always talking about helping people," he explained. "Are we going to help more people because Grandpa Charles is sick?" Kate paused, struck by her youngest son's ability to connect the dots between their family's current challenges and their evolving sense of purpose. "I think we've always wanted to help people," she said carefully. "But sometimes difficult times help us understand better how we can make a difference." Louis nodded solemnly, as if this explanation made perfect sense to him. "I want to help too," he said. "I've been thinking about ways I could help other kids who might be sad or scared." "What kinds of ways?" Kate asked, genuinely curious about what her 10-year-old son had been considering. Louis sat up in bed, his excitement overcoming his sleepiness. "I could visit schools and talk to kids about how it's okay to feel scared sometimes, but that their families will take care of them. And I could bring some of my toys to give to kids who don't have very many." His suggestions were simple but heartfelt, reflecting the generous spirit that had always characterized their youngest child. "Those are beautiful ideas, Louis," Kate said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. I think there will be lots of ways for you to help other children as you get older." She tucked his covers around him and turned off his bedside lamp, leaving only the soft glow of his nightlight to illuminate the room. As she walked down the hallway toward her own bedroom, Kate reflected on the conversation she had had with each of her children over the past few days. Despite the uncertainty and sadness surrounding King Charles's illness, their family seemed to be finding ways to channel their emotions into positive action. They were not just preparing for a future where they might have greater responsibilities. They were actively seeking ways to make a meaningful impact with the opportunities they had right now. William was already in bed when she entered their room, reading a briefing document by the light of his bedside lamp. He looked up as she approached, setting aside his papers to give her his full attention. "How was Louis tonight?" he asked, making room for her on the bed. "Thoughtful," Kate replied, settling in beside him. "All of our children are processing this situation in such mature ways. I'm proud of them, but I also feel sad that they have to grow up so quickly." William nodded, understanding the mixed emotions she was experiencing. "I keep thinking about my mother," he said quietly. "How she handled everything when I was young. How she managed to maintain some sense of normalcy for Harry and me even when our lives were anything but normal." Kate took his hand, knowing how difficult it still was for him to talk about Princess Diana, even after all these years. "She would be so proud of the father you've become," Kate said softly, "and she would love seeing how compassionate and thoughtful our children are." William squeezed her hand gratefully, drawing comfort from her words. They lay together in the darkness, each lost in their own thoughts about the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and new opportunities to serve others. But tonight, they were simply a husband and wife supporting each other through a difficult time, finding strength in their love and their shared commitment to their family and their values. The call came at 5 in the morning on a Tuesday in November. Kate heard William's phone buzzing on his nightstand and felt him reach across her to answer it, his voice immediately alert, despite having been deeply asleep moments before. She didn't need to hear the words to know what the call meant. She could tell from the way William's breathing changed, from the sudden tension in his body, from the long silence that followed the brief conversation. "It's time," William said softly when he ended the call, his voice steady but thick with emotion. Kate sat up immediately, reaching for his hand in the darkness. King Charles had taken a turn for the worse during the night, and the family was being called to say their final goodbyes. They moved quietly and efficiently, years of royal training helping them navigate even this most personal of crises with careful coordination. Kate called their personal staff, while William contacted his brother Harry and other close family members. Within 30 minutes, they were dressed and preparing to wake the children, each of them dreading the conversations that lay ahead. George was the first to understand what was happening when they entered his room. At 14, he had inherited his father's intuitive nature, and the sight of his parents fully dressed in the early morning hours told him everything he needed to know. He sat up in bed immediately, his face grave but composed. "We need to go to Grandpa Charles," William said simply, sitting on the edge of George's bed. "This morning, right away." George nodded, already reaching for clothes from his wardrobe. There were no tears, no protests, just the quiet acceptance of a young man who understood that this day had been inevitable. Charlotte took the news with similar composure, but Kate could see the emotion she was working hard to control. At 12, she was old enough to understand death, old enough to feel the full weight of loss, but still young enough to need extra comfort and reassurance. She hugged Kate tightly before getting dressed, and Kate held her for several long moments, trying to provide strength for both of them. Louis was the most difficult to wake and explain the situation to. At 10, he had a child's understanding of death. He knew it meant that someone went away forever, but he struggled to grasp the permanence of it, the way it would change everything for their family. When William told him they needed to go see Grandpa Charles one last time, Louis asked if they could bring the drawing he had made the previous week, a picture of the family having a picnic together. The drive to the hospital was silent except for the soft sound of Charlotte reading quietly to Louis from one of their favorite books. Kate stared out the window at the dark London streets, thinking about all the times King Charles had been there for their family, all the advice he had given them, all the moments of joy and laughter they had shared together. She thought about the day she had married William, how nervous she had been about joining the royal family, and how King Charles had taken her aside to tell her how grateful he was that his son had found such a loving partner. At the hospital, they were escorted through the same private entrance they had used for previous visits, but everything felt different now. The hallways seemed longer, the atmosphere heavier, the sense of finality unavoidable. Other family members were already there. Harry had arrived from California with his wife and children. Other relatives had gathered to be present for these final hours. King Charles was unconscious when they entered his room, but the medical staff assured them that he could likely still hear their voices. Kate watched as William approached his father's bedside, taking the king's hand and speaking to him in low, loving tones. She saw the man she had married, the future king, reduced to simply a son saying goodbye to his father. George stepped forward next, his young voice clear and strong as he spoke to his grandfather. "Thank you for teaching me about service," he said simply. "Thank you for showing me what it means to put others first." Kate felt tears streaming down her face at her son's words, at the maturity and grace he was showing in this impossibly difficult moment. Charlotte read a poem she had written specifically for this occasion, verses about love and memory and the ways that important people stay with us even after they're gone. Her voice never wavered as she read, but Kate could see her hands shaking as she held the paper. Louis approached last, carrying his drawing and chattering to his grandfather in the same cheerful tone he had always used with him. "I brought you a picture, Grandpa," he said, carefully placing the drawing where King Charles could see it if he opened his eyes. "It's all of us together like we always are." The innocence of his gesture, the simple faith that love could transcend even death, broke Kate's heart and filled it with pride at the same time. They spent the morning taking turns sitting with King Charles, sharing memories, expressing gratitude, saying all the things that needed to be said. Kate found herself thinking about the conversations she had had with him over the years, the way he had welcomed her into the family, the gentle guidance he had provided as she learned to navigate her role as a senior member of the royal family. Around noon, the medical staff indicated that the end was very near. The family gathered around King Charles's bed, holding hands and surrounding him with love in his final moments. When he passed away peacefully just after 1 o'clock, Kate felt the profound shift that occurred in that room. William had just become king. George had just become the heir to the throne, and their entire family had just entered a new chapter of their lives. The immediate aftermath was a carefully choreographed series of procedures that had been planned for years. Notifications had to be made to government officials, to Commonwealth nations, to other members of the royal family. The media had to be informed, arrangements had to be made for the formal announcement, and the complex machinery of succession had to begin moving. But in those first moments after King Charles died, none of that mattered. What mattered was William sitting quietly beside his father's body, holding the hand that had guided him throughout his life. What mattered was the way their children stood together, supporting each other through this life-changing loss. What mattered was the love and respect that filled that hospital room. The sense that a good man had lived a meaningful life and had passed on his values to the next generation. Kate found herself thinking about her own parents, about how they had raised her with strong values and a sense of service to others.
but how different their lives had been from the one she was now living. Her father had been a flight dispatcher, her mother had worked for a party planning company, and they had lived quiet, private lives focused on their family and their local community. Now she was about to become queen, and her children were about to inherit roles that would shape the rest of their lives. The formal procedures began within hours of King Charles's death. Palace officials arrived to escort them through the necessary protocols. Legal documents had to be signed, and government representatives needed to meet with the new king to begin the transition process. Kate watched William transform before her eyes, stepping into his new role with the dignity and gravitas that the moment required. George, as the new heir to the throne, also had immediate new responsibilities. Palace advisors needed to meet with him to discuss his changed status. His education would need to be adjusted to prepare him for his future role, and security arrangements would have to be enhanced. Kate saw him handling these changes with remarkable composure, but she also noticed the way his shoulders seemed to carry a heavier weight. Charlotte and Louis were affected too, though in less dramatic ways. As the children of the reigning monarch, their public profiles would increase, their security needs would change, and they would be expected to take on more royal duties as they got older. Kate made a mental note to have long conversations with both of them about how these changes would affect their daily lives. The first official portrait of the new royal family was taken that evening, in the same room where King Charles had passed away earlier in the day. Kate looked at the photograph later and was struck by how much they had aged in just a few hours. William's face showed the weight of his new responsibilities. The children looked older and more serious than they had that morning, and she herself looked like a woman who had just stepped into one of the most scrutinized roles in the world. That night, after all the official business had been concluded and they had returned home, Kate found William standing in their bedroom, still wearing the formal clothes he had put on for the official procedures. He was staring out the window at the palace grounds, but she could tell he wasn't really seeing anything. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly, approaching him carefully. The events of the day had been so overwhelming that none of them had really had time to process their emotions. "Empty," William said honestly. "Sad, overwhelmed, terrified, proud, all at the same time." He turned to face her, and she could see all of those emotions playing across his features. "I keep thinking about all the things I still wanted to learn from him, all the conversations we didn't get to have." Kate took his hands, feeling the tremor of exhaustion and emotion that he was trying to control. "He taught you everything you need to know," she said firmly. "Maybe not everything you wanted to know, but everything you need. And you're not doing this alone. We're a team, remember?" William pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against him. "I couldn't do this without you," he whispered into her hair. "I need you to know that. Whatever comes next, whatever challenges we face, I need you beside me." "Always," Kate whispered back, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Through everything, always. They held each other for a long time, drawing strength from their connection and their shared commitment to their family and their values. Outside their window, London continued its normal rhythms, unaware that their world had just changed forever. But inside that bedroom, a new king and queen were finding their footing, preparing to lead their family and their nation through whatever challenges lay ahead. The days that followed King Charles's death were a blur of official ceremonies, meetings with government officials, and public appearances designed to reassure the nation that the transition of power was proceeding smoothly. Kate found herself studying protocol manuals and learning about procedures she had never needed to know before. As queen, she would have different responsibilities, different expectations, and a different level of public scrutiny. The children handled the changes with remarkable resilience, but Kate could see the ways the new reality was affecting each of them. George threw himself into his studies with even more intensity, as if trying to prepare himself for the enormous responsibility that awaited him. Charlotte became more protective of Louis, taking on an almost maternal role that both touched and worried Kate. Louis asked more questions than usual, trying to understand how their lives would be different now that Daddy was king. One evening, about a week after King Charles's death, Kate found herself alone in her sitting room, surrounded by briefing papers and correspondence that required her immediate attention. The sheer volume of information she needed to absorb was overwhelming, everything from constitutional law to charitable organizations to diplomatic protocols. William found her there, looking exhausted and somewhat defeated by the mountain of material before her. Without a word, he sat beside her on the sofa and began helping her sort through the papers.
organizing them into manageable categories and priorities. "We'll figure this out together," he said simply, echoing the promise they had made to each other years ago when they first married. One day at a time, one challenge at a time. Kate leaned against him, grateful for his steady presence and his unwavering support. "Sometimes I wonder if we're ready for this," she admitted. "If any of us are really prepared for what comes next." William was quiet for a moment, considering her words carefully. "I don't think anyone is ever truly ready to be king and queen," he said finally. "But I think what matters is that we're committed to learning, to serving others, and to staying true to our values no matter how much our circumstances change." That night, as they prepared for bed, Kate thought about the conversation she had had with King Charles just a few months earlier, when he had thanked her for being the heart of their family. She understood now what he had meant, that in all the ceremony and protocol and public scrutiny that came with royal life, what mattered most was the love and support that family members provided for each other. She looked at William, already asleep beside her, his face peaceful but still showing the stress of the past week. She thought about their children, sleeping down the hall, each of them processing these enormous changes in their own way, and she made a silent promise to all of them that no matter how their roles and responsibilities evolved, no matter how much public attention and pressure they faced, she would always prioritize their emotional well-being and their connection to each other. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be public appearances where every gesture was analyzed, decisions that would affect millions of people, moments when the weight of their responsibilities felt almost unbearable. But they would face all of it together, as a family united by love and guided by the values that King Charles had instilled in them. As Kate drifted off to sleep, she thought about the little boy in the hospital who had called her a superhero, about Charlotte's plans to help families keep their pets, about George's determination to serve others, about Louise's generous spirit. Their family had been tested by loss and challenged by enormous new responsibilities, but they were still the same people who had gathered around the breakfast table just weeks ago, still committed to making a difference in the world, still bound together by love and shared purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, and new ways to demonstrate the grace and compassion that had always defined their approach to royal life. But tonight, they were simply a family who had said goodbye to someone they loved, who had supported each other through a difficult transition, and who were preparing to face the future together with courage and hope. 6 months had passed since William became king, and the rhythm of their new life was beginning to feel more natural, though no less demanding. Kate stood in the blue drawing room of Buckingham Palace, adjusting her pearl necklace one final time before the doors would open to admit the first guests of the evening's reception. As queen, every public appearance carried additional weight, every conversation was scrutinized for diplomatic significance, and every smile or gesture could make international news. Tonight's reception was particularly important. They were hosting representatives from children's charities across the Commonwealth, an event that Kate had personally requested to organize. It represented her vision of what their reign could accomplish, a focus on practical service rather than just ceremonial duties. The guest list included social workers, teachers, medical professionals, and volunteers who worked directly with vulnerable children, people whose daily efforts rarely received public recognition. William entered the room, looking distinguished in his formal evening wear, but carrying himself with the natural confidence that had always been one of his most appealing qualities. Even with the additional pressures of kingship, he had managed to maintain the approachable demeanor that made people feel comfortable in his presence. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly, straightening his cufflinks as he joined her near the ornate fireplace. The question carried multiple layers of meaning, not just about tonight's event, but about their ongoing adjustment to their new roles and the constant public attention that came with them. "I think so," Kate replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her elegant navy dress. "I keep thinking about all the incredible work these people do every day, often with very limited resources and little recognition. Tonight feels like an opportunity to shine a spotlight on their efforts and maybe inspire others to get involved." The reception officially began an hour later, with Kate and William moving gracefully through the crowd, engaging in meaningful conversations with guests from across the globe. Kate found herself deeply moved by the stories she heard. A teacher from Australia who had developed innovative programs for children with learning disabilities. A social worker from Canada who specialized in helping refugee families. A medical researcher from South Africa who was working on treatments for childhood diseases that primarily affected impoverished communities. One conversation particularly touched her heart. She was speaking with a woman named Sarah who ran a small charity in Wales that provided support for children who had experienced trauma. Sarah's work was entirely volunteer-based, funded through small donations and community fundraising efforts, but the impact she was making was extraordinary. "We see children who have been through things no child should ever have to experience," Sarah explained, her voice soft but passionate. "Abuse, neglect, witnessing violence, losing parents. Trauma that affects every aspect of their development. But with the right support, with people who believe in them and show them consistent love and care, these children can heal and thrive." Kate listened intently, asking detailed questions about Sarah's methods and the challenges she faced in providing adequate resources for the children in her care. She learned about innovative therapy techniques, community support networks, and the crucial importance of long-term commitment to children's healing processes. "What would make the biggest difference in expanding your work?" Kate asked, genuinely curious about practical solutions rather than just offering polite acknowledgement of Sarah's efforts. Sarah's eyes lit up at the question. "Funding for training. Honestly," she said, "there are so many people who want to help, volunteers with good hearts and genuine desire to make a difference, but they need proper training to work effectively with traumatized children. If we could provide comprehensive training programs, we could reach so many more children." Kate made mental notes as Sarah spoke, already thinking about ways that royal patronage might be used to support these training initiatives. This was exactly the kind of practical, direct impact she wanted their reign to emphasize. Not just ceremonial visits and photo opportunities, but real support for people doing essential work. Meanwhile, William was engaged in an equally meaningful conversation with a group of educators from various Commonwealth countries, who were working to improve literacy rates in underserved communities. He listened carefully as they described innovative programs that used technology, peer mentoring, and community involvement to help children develop strong reading skills despite challenging circumstances. "The key is meeting children where they are," explained Marcus, a teacher from Jamaica who had developed a successful program using storytelling and local cultural traditions to engage reluctant readers. When children see themselves reflected in the stories they read, when the characters and situations feel relevant to their own lives, reading becomes something they want to do rather than something they're forced to do. William was fascinated by the practical details of Marcus's approach and asked thoughtful questions about implementation, funding, and the possibility of adapting similar programs for different cultural contexts. As he spoke with Marcus and the other educators, he found himself thinking about his own children's education and the privileges they enjoyed that so many other children lacked. Later in the evening, Kate had the opportunity to speak with a remarkable woman named Dr. Jennifer Chen, a pediatric psychologist from Singapore who had developed groundbreaking programs for helping children cope with anxiety and depression. Dr. Chen's work was particularly relevant given the increasing rates of mental health challenges among young people worldwide. Children today face pressures that previous generations couldn't have imagined, Dr. Chen explained. Social media, academic competition, family instability, global uncertainty, all of these factors contribute to anxiety levels that can be overwhelming for developing minds. She described innovative therapeutic approaches that combined traditional counseling with art therapy, music, and physical activity. We've found that children respond best when they have multiple ways to express their feelings and work through their challenges. Dr. Chen continued. Some children are verbal processors, others need to draw or create music or move their bodies. The key is providing diverse pathways for healing and growth. Kate was particularly struck by Dr. Chen's emphasis on prevention rather than just treatment. We've developed programs for schools and communities that teach children emotional regulation skills before they develop serious mental health problems, Dr. Chen explained. Teaching children to recognize their emotions, understand their triggers, and develop healthy coping strategies can prevent many mental health crises. As the evening progressed, Kate found herself energized rather than exhausted by these conversations. Each guest represented years of dedicated service to children in need, innovative approaches to complex problems, and proof that individual effort could create meaningful change. She began to envision ways that royal support could amplify these efforts,
creating networks of collaboration and resource sharing that could expand successful programs to reach more children. During a brief quiet moment, William joined her near the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. The formal reception was still in full swing around them, but they had carved out a moment of private conversation amid the public event. "What are you thinking about?" William asked, noticing the thoughtful expression on her face as she looked out at the illuminated gardens. "All of these people," Kate replied, gesturing subtly toward their guests. "The work they're doing, the children they're helping, the innovative solutions they're developing with limited resources. I keep thinking about how we might be able to support their efforts more effectively, beyond just hosting receptions and making donations." William nodded, understanding her train of thought. More than just being patrons of organizations, actually being partners in solving problems? "Exactly," Kate said, her voice growing more animated as she articulated her vision. "What if we could create opportunities for these remarkable people to collaborate with each other? What if we could use our platform to highlight their work and inspire others to get involved? What if we could help connect them with resources and funding sources they might not be able to access on their own?" William considered her suggestions, seeing the potential impact of such an approach. "It would be different from traditional royal charitable work," he observed. "More active, more involved, potentially more controversial, if we're seen as taking sides on particular approaches to social problems. But potentially more effective," Kate pointed out. "Instead of just symbolizing support for good causes, we could actually help solve problems." She paused, looking back at their guests with renewed determination. "These children these people work with, they don't need symbols. They need real help, practical solutions, sustained support." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of George, who had been given permission to attend the latter part of the evening's reception as part of his gradual introduction to royal duties. At 15, he was beginning to take on more public responsibilities, always with careful guidance and preparation from his parents. "Mum, Dad," George said quietly, approaching them with the respectful formality he had learned to use at public events. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." He was accompanied by a young woman who appeared to be in her early 20s, with an earnest expression and the slightly overwhelmed look of someone attending their first royal reception. "This is Amanda," George continued, his voice carrying genuine enthusiasm. "She's just finished university and she started a program in her hometown that teaches coding skills to children in low-income families. I thought you'd be interested in her work." Kate and William exchanged glances, proud of George's initiative in identifying and engaging with someone whose work aligned with their values. They spent the next 15 minutes talking with Amanda about her program, learning about the challenges she faced in getting access to computers and internet connections for the children she worked with, and discussing the long-term potential of her approach. "Technology skills are becoming essential for almost every career path," Amanda explained, her initial nervousness fading as she discussed her passion project. "But children from low-income families often don't have access to computers at home, and many schools in underserved areas don't have adequate technology programs. We're trying to bridge that gap by providing free classes and access to equipment." Kate was impressed not only by Amanda's initiative but by the thoughtful way George had engaged with her work and identified connections to his parents' interests. It suggested that their efforts to involve their children in meaningful service were beginning to bear fruit. As the formal reception wound down and the last guests departed, Kate found herself reflecting on the evening's conversations and the insights she had gained. Each person she had met represented a different approach to helping children, but they all shared common themes: the importance of treating children as individuals, the need for long-term commitment and support, and the power of innovative thinking to solve complex problems. Back in their private apartments, Kate kicked off her formal shoes and settled into a comfortable chair while William loosened his tie and poured them each a cup of tea. George had already gone to his room, but not before sharing his thoughts about the evening and expressing interest in learning more about some of the programs they had discussed. "I think tonight was important," William said, settling into the chair across from Kate's. "Not just as a nice gesture to people doing good work, but as a way of thinking differently about what we can accomplish in these roles." Kate nodded, still processing all the information and inspiration she had absorbed throughout the evening. "I want to follow up with several of these people," she said. "Not just formal thank you notes, but real conversations about how we might be able to support their work more effectively." "Which ones particularly caught your attention?" William asked, pulling out his phone to make notes about potential follow-up actions. Kate described her conversations with Sarah, Dr. Chen, and Amanda, along with several other guests whose work had impressed her. As she talked, William could see her developing a comprehensive vision for how their roles as king and queen could evolve beyond traditional expectations to become more directly involved in addressing social problems. "There's something else I want to discuss," Kate said, her voice becoming more serious. "I've been thinking about Charlotte and Louis, about how we prepare them for their futures without overwhelming them with pressure or expectations." William set aside his phone, recognizing that this was a conversation that deserved his full attention. "What specifically are you concerned about?" he asked. Kate chose her words carefully, trying to articulate thoughts that had been developing over the past several months. "I see how George is handling his role as heir, the way he's thrown himself into learning about service and leadership, the maturity he's showing, the genuine interest he has in making a difference. But I also see the weight he's carrying, the way he sometimes seems older than his years." William nodded, understanding her concern. George had indeed adapted to his new status with remarkable grace, but the cost of that adaptation was sometimes visible in quiet moments when he thought no one was watching. "Charlotte and Louis will have different roles," Kate continued, "but they'll still face expectations and scrutiny that most children never have to deal with. I want to make sure we're preparing them for that reality, while also protecting their childhoods and allowing them to develop their own interests and personalities." They spent the next hour discussing strategies for supporting all three of their children through the ongoing adjustment to their new family circumstances. They talked about the importance of maintaining normal family routines despite their changed public roles, about providing opportunities for the children to engage in service that matched their individual interests and capabilities, and about ensuring that their education continued to emphasize critical thinking and empathy alongside the traditional subjects. "I think what we're doing is working," William said finally. "The children are all showing remarkable resilience and developing strong values. Tonight, watching George engage with Amanda and her work, seeing the thoughtful questions he asked, and the genuine interest he showed, it made me proud of the young man he's becoming." Kate smiled, remembering George's enthusiasm as he introduced them to Amanda and his thoughtful follow-up questions about her coding program. "He's finding his own way to make a difference," she observed, "not just following scripts or fulfilling obligations, but genuinely connecting with causes that matter to him." As they prepared for bed, both Kate and William felt a sense of accomplishment about the evening's reception and optimism about the direction their reign was taking. The conversations they had had with their guests had reinforced their belief that their roles could be used to make meaningful, practical differences in people's lives rather than just serving ceremonial functions. "Tomorrow I want to start reaching out to some of tonight's guests," Kate said as they turned off the bedroom lights. "I want to learn more about their work and explore concrete ways we might be able to support their efforts. And I want to talk with the children about what they observed tonight." William added, "See what interested them most, what questions they have, how they're thinking about their own potential contributions to causes they care about." As Kate drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking about the children and families that tonight's guests served. Young people facing challenges that she could barely imagine, but who were supported by dedicated adults working to make their lives better. She thought about the responsibility she and William carried to use their platform effectively, to move beyond symbolic gestures toward practical impact. The work ahead would require careful planning, sustained commitment, and the kind of hands-on involvement that traditional royal roles didn't always encourage. But tonight had confirmed her belief that this approach was not only possible but essential. The children these remarkable people served deserved more than symbolic support. They deserved real help, innovative solutions, and the sustained commitment that could transform their circumstances and their futures. 1 year had passed since King Charles's death, and the transformation in the royal family was evident in ways both large and small. Kate stood in the newly renovated community center in East London, watching as children from the local neighborhood participated in an innovative program that combined her passion for early childhood development with William's interest in mental health initiatives. The program was one of several pilot projects they had launched based on the connections they had made at that memorable reception. This particular center represented everything Kate hoped their reign could accomplish: real, practical change that made a tangible difference in people's daily lives. The facility offered coding classes like the ones Amanda had described, trauma-informed childcare based on Sarah's methods, and art therapy programs inspired by Dr. Tiski, Chen's work with children facing mental health challenges. It wasn't just a royal patronage or a photo opportunity. It was a fully funded, professionally staffed program that was already showing measurable results. "Your Majesty," called out a small voice, and Kate turned to see 7-year-old Marcus approaching with a tablet in his hands. He was part of the coding program and had clearly overcome his initial shyness around royal visitors. "I made a game. Do you want to see it?" Kate knelt down to Marcus's level, genuinely excited to see what he had created. The simple game he had designed involved helping a character navigate through various challenges to reach family members, a reflection of his own experience as a child whose parents worked multiple jobs and weren't always available when he needed them. "This is incredible, Marcus," Kate said, meaning every word. "Can you tell me how you came up with the idea?" As Marcus explained his creative process, Kate was struck by how naturally he had used technology to process and express his own experiences. This was exactly the kind of outcome they had hoped for when they designed the program. Meanwhile, William was in another part of the center, participating in a group discussion with teenagers who were part of the mental health support program. At 16 and 17, these young people were dealing with anxiety, depression, family conflicts, and social pressures that could easily overwhelm them without proper support. The program provided them with professional counseling, peer support groups, and creative outlets for expressing their emotions. "The thing that helps me most," shared Aisha, a 16-year-old who had been struggling with severe anxiety, "is knowing that other people my age understand what I'm going through. When I'm having a panic attack, I can text someone from the group and they actually know how to help me." William listened carefully to each teenager's perspective, asking thoughtful questions and sharing his own experiences with mental health challenges when appropriate. His openness about his own struggles with grief and anxiety after his mother's death created a connection with these young people that went beyond his royal status. "It's important to remember that getting help isn't a sign of weakness," William said during the discussion. "It's actually a sign of strength, recognizing when you need support and being brave enough to ask for it." In another area of the center, George was working with a group of children his age who were participating in a leadership development program. At 15, he had become increasingly involved in the family's charitable initiatives, but always in ways that felt authentic to his interests and personality, rather than forced or ceremonial. Today, he was helping facilitate a discussion about community service projects the young people wanted to develop in their neighborhoods. "What problems do you see in your community that you think you could help solve?" George asked the group, his natural leadership abilities becoming more evident as he guided the conversation. The responses ranged from lack of safe spaces for children to play, to elderly neighbors who needed assistance with daily tasks, to environmental concerns about litter and pollution in local parks. Charlotte had chosen to spend her day at a different location, the Animal Welfare Center, where she had been volunteering regularly for over a year. At 13, she had developed her initial interest in helping families keep their pets into a comprehensive understanding of animal welfare issues. Today, she was helping train new volunteers and working with veterinary students to provide basic health care for pets whose owners couldn't afford regular veterinary services. "The most important thing to remember," Charlotte explained to a group of new volunteers, "is that people love their pets just as much whether they have a lot of money or very little money. Sometimes families have to make difficult choices, and our job is to help them keep their pets healthy and safe without making them feel embarrassed or judged." Her maturity and compassion impressed the adult volunteers who worked with her. Despite her privileged background, Charlotte had developed a genuine understanding of the economic challenges that many families faced, and her approach to helping was both practical and respectful. Louis, at 11, was participating in a program designed specifically for younger children who wanted to learn about helping others. He was working with a group of his peers to create care packages for children in local hospitals, an activity that combined his natural generosity with age-appropriate service learning. His enthusiasm and kindness made him a natural leader among the younger volunteers. "My mum says that helping other people is the most important thing we can do," Louis explained to another child as they carefully packed toys and books into a care package. "Even small things can make someone's day better." As the afternoon progressed, Kate found herself moving between the different program areas, observing the interactions between her children and the young people they were working with. She was struck by how naturally all three of her children had embraced service as a fundamental part of their identity
but also how differently each of them expressed that commitment based on their individual personalities and interests. William joined her during a brief quiet moment in the center's garden, where they could speak privately while still keeping an eye on the various activities happening around them. "This feels different from traditional royal engagements," William observed, watching George facilitate a planning session for community projects. "More meaningful, more connected to real outcomes." Kate nodded, feeling the same sense of satisfaction and purpose. "The children are learning that their roles in the family come with genuine responsibility to serve others," she said. "But they're also discovering their own passions and capabilities, finding ways to make a difference that feel authentic to who they are as individuals." Their conversation was interrupted by Amanda, the young woman George had introduced them to at the reception months earlier. Her coding program had been one of the first initiatives they had supported, and it had grown significantly since its launch. "Your Majesties," Amanda said, approaching with obvious excitement, "I wanted to update you on the program's progress. We now have over 200 children enrolled across 5 different locations, and we've already seen remarkable improvements in both their technical skills and their confidence levels." Kate and William listened as Amanda described specific success stories. Children who had discovered talents they didn't know they had. Families whose economic situations had improved as parents learned new skills alongside their children. Teenagers who were now considering technology careers they had never imagined pursuing. "But the most important outcome," Amanda continued, "is the way these children are beginning to see themselves differently. They're developing problem-solving skills, creative thinking abilities, and confidence that will help them succeed regardless of what career paths they eventually choose." This was exactly the kind of long-term impact Kate and William had hoped to achieve through their more hands-on approach to royal service. Rather than simply attending events and offering symbolic support, they were actively participating in creating programs that produced measurable, lasting change in people's lives. As the day's activities began to wind down, the royal family gathered in the center's main room to participate in a closing ceremony that the children and teenagers had organized themselves. Each program group shared highlights from their work, celebrated individual achievements, and talked about their plans for future service projects. Kate was particularly moved by a presentation from the trauma support group, where children who had experienced difficult circumstances shared how the program had helped them develop coping strategies and build supportive relationships. Their resilience and hope, despite the challenges they had faced, reminded her of why this work was so important. "Before this program, I felt like I was different from other kids because of what happened to me," shared 10-year-old Emma, whose family had experienced homelessness. "But now I know that what makes me different also makes me strong, and I can use my experiences to help other kids who are going through similar things." George stood up to address the group, speaking without notes in a way that demonstrated his growing comfort with public speaking and his genuine connection to the work being done. "What I've learned from being here with all of you," George said, his voice clear and confident, "is that helping others isn't just something we do because it's expected of us. It's something we do because when we work together to solve problems, everyone benefits. The people we're helping, the communities we serve, and ourselves as well." His words reflected a mature understanding of service that went beyond obligation to embrace genuine partnership and mutual benefit. Kate felt proud of the young man he was becoming and optimistic about the kind of leader he would eventually be. Charlotte also spoke briefly about her work with the Animal Welfare Program, emphasizing the connections between animal care and human compassion. "Taking care of animals teaches us to be patient, to be gentle, to think about the needs of others who might not be able to speak for themselves," she said. "Those are skills that help us be better people in all areas of our lives." Even Louis, despite his young age, contributed to the ceremony by presenting the care packages his group had created, explaining in his characteristic, enthusiastic way how they had chosen each item specifically to bring comfort and joy to children in the hospital. "We picked soft blankets because being in the hospital can be scary and cold," Louis explained to the gathered group, holding up one of the packages they had assembled. "And we included books because reading can take your mind off being worried about things." His simple wisdom and genuine care touched everyone in the room. As the ceremony concluded and families began to depart, Kate found herself in conversation with several parents whose children participated in the programs. Their feedback was overwhelmingly positive.
But more importantly, it was specific and detailed about the concrete ways the programs were making differences in their children's lives. "My daughter Sarah has struggled with anxiety since she was very young," explained one mother. "She barely spoke in social situations and had panic attacks whenever she had to try something new. But through the art therapy program here, she's learned ways to express her feelings and manage her anxiety. She's like a different child, confident, creative, willing to take on challenges." Another parent described how the coding program had not only taught her son technical skills, but had also helped him develop patience, logical thinking, and the confidence to approach complex problems systematically. "He uses those skills in all areas of his life now," she said. "His grades have improved, he's more organized, and he's developing leadership qualities I never saw before." These conversations reinforced Kate's belief that their approach was working. By focusing on comprehensive, well-funded programs that addressed children's needs holistically, they were creating opportunities for genuine transformation rather than just providing temporary assistance. William spent his final hour at the center meeting with the program staff and community leaders who had been instrumental in making the initiative successful. These conversations focused on sustainability, expansion possibilities, and lessons learned that could be applied to similar programs in other locations. "The key to success has been the integration of different services," explained Dr. Martinez, the center's director. "When children receive coding instruction alongside mental health support, when families can access both childcare and job training, when teenagers get academic tutoring combined with leadership development, that's when we see lasting change." This integrated approach had become a hallmark of the programs Kate and William supported. Rather than creating separate, disconnected services, they emphasized comprehensive support that addressed the complex, interconnected challenges that families faced. As they prepared to leave the center, the royal family took a few minutes to walk through the facility one more time, observing the spaces where so much meaningful work was happening. Kate paused in the art therapy room, looking at the colorful creations that covered the walls, visual representations of children's emotions, dreams, fears, and hopes. It showed a family of stick figures holding hands in front of a building that was clearly meant to be this community center. The child who had created it had written "My Safe Place" at the bottom of the page. Kate felt tears prick her eyes as she realized the profound impact that their work was having on individual children's sense of security and belonging. The drive home was filled with animated conversation as the children shared their experiences from the day of days. George talked about the community service projects the teenagers were planning, his excitement evident as he described their creative problem-solving approaches. Charlotte discussed her work with the veterinary students and her ideas for expanding animal welfare education in schools. Louis chattered about the children he had met and the stories they had shared about their experiences in the hospital. "I want to visit the hospital next week to deliver the care packages," Louis announced. "I want to meet the kids we made them for and see if they like what we picked out for them." Kate and William exchanged glances, proud of their youngest son's desire to follow through on his service commitments. "That's a wonderful idea, Louis," Kate said. "We can arrange a visit and you can see how your gifts are being used." She made a mental note to coordinate with the hospital staff to ensure that Louis's visit would be appropriate and beneficial for both him and the young patients. That evening, as they gathered for dinner in their private dining room, the conversation continued to focus on the day's activities and the lessons each family member had learned. Kate was struck by how naturally service had become integrated into their family identity, not as an obligation or a burden, but as a source of meaning and connection. "I've been thinking about something," Charlotte said during dessert, her expression thoughtful and serious. "All the work we're doing with animals and children and families, it's all connected, isn't it? When families are struggling with poverty or mental health issues, their pets suffer too. When children don't have access to good education or health care, it affects their whole communities." William nodded appreciatively at his daughter's insight. "That's exactly right, Charlotte. Social problems are interconnected, which is why the solutions need to be comprehensive and collaborative." George leaned forward, clearly engaged by the conversation. "So instead of just supporting lots of different charities that work on separate issues, we should be looking for ways to help them work together and address multiple problems at the same time?" "That's a very sophisticated way to think about it," Kate said, impressed by her eldest son's analytical approach.
It's one of the reasons we've been focusing on programs like today's center that integrate different types of support and services. As the evening progressed, Kate found herself reflecting on how much their family had grown and changed over the past year. The loss of King Charles had been devastating, but it had also catalyzed a transformation in their approach to royal service that was producing remarkable results. Instead of simply fulfilling traditional expectations, they were actively working to redefine what modern monarchy could accomplish. The children were developing into thoughtful, compassionate individuals who understood their privileges and were committed to using them responsibly. George was becoming a natural leader who inspired others through example rather than authority. Charlotte was developing expertise in areas she was passionate about while maintaining empathy for people facing challenges different from her own. Louis was learning to channel his natural generosity and enthusiasm into meaningful service that matched his age and abilities. William had grown into his role as king with dignity and purpose, maintaining the approachable, authentic leadership style that had always been his strength, while taking on the additional gravitas that his position required. His comfort with sharing his own vulnerabilities had created deeper connections with the people they served, and had helped normalize conversations about mental health and emotional well-being. For Kate, the past year had been a period of discovering her own voice and vision as queen. She had learned to balance the ceremonial aspects of her role with the hands-on involvement that felt most meaningful to her. The programs they had developed were producing measurable results, changing individual lives and strengthening communities in ways that felt authentic and sustainable. As they prepared for bed, Kate and William took a few minutes to discuss their plans for the following week, which included visits to 3 more community centers, meetings with government officials about expanding successful programs, and a formal dinner with international delegates who were interested in adapting their approaches for their own countries. "I never imagined that royal service could feel this rewarding," William said as they turned off the bedroom lights. "Growing up, I always understood that we had responsibilities to serve others, but I thought it would feel more like duty and obligation. This feels like purpose." Kate smiled in the darkness, understanding exactly what he meant. "We're not just representing values or traditions anymore," she said. "We're actively living those values and creating new traditions based on real engagement with real problems." As she drifted off to sleep, Kate's mind was filled with images from the day. Children learning to code, teenagers discussing mental health with openness and courage, families receiving support without judgment, volunteers discovering their own capacity to make a difference. These were the moments that gave meaning to their titles and their platforms, the evidence that their approach to royal service was creating lasting positive change. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to serve, new challenges to address, and new ways to demonstrate the grace and compassion that had become the hallmarks of their reign. The work would never be finished. There would always be more children who needed support, more communities that could benefit from comprehensive services, more innovative approaches to explore and implement. But tonight, Kate felt a deep sense of satisfaction and gratitude. Their family had found its purpose, their work was making a measurable difference, and their children were growing up with values and commitments that would serve them well regardless of what the future held. They had transformed their grief and their responsibilities into something beautiful and meaningful, a legacy of service that honored the past while creating hope for the future. The foundation they were building through programs like today's community center would continue to grow and evolve, touching countless lives and creating ripple effects of positive change that would extend far beyond anything they could imagine. This was what modern monarchy could accomplish when it embraced authentic engagement, practical solutions, and the kind of sustained commitment that treated service as a privilege rather than a burden. In the quiet of their private quarters, surrounded by the security and comfort of their royal life, Kate and William had found the grace and compassion that would define their reign, not just as symbols of service, but as active participants in creating a more just and caring world for all the children whose lives they touched.